antigens and how the whole thing kind of fits together in your body. We're going to take those antibodies out now of your body. And when we're talking about antibodies and antigens here, we're talking about test methodologies. And honestly, we're going to do some tests in lab, like we'll do HIV, and it's an EIA kit. We're also going to do it by octoloading, just because octoloading is kind of fun. But all of these different methodologies can be used for a variety of testing. Does that make sense? So in other words, I could have, monotest is the easiest one. I can do a old-fashioned monospot, which is an RBC agglutination test. I can do a more modern monospot, which is a latex particle agglutination test. I can do a monotest EIA kit, which is one of our 1-2 look for blues. If I really wanted to, I could do a monotest by PCR. Okay. All of this stuff there's pluses and minuses to each sort of testing methodology. So when we're going through these, don't focus, even in lab, don't focus on what we're actually testing for as much as how the test kit that we're using works, or how the methodology is. Yes?
Does like insurance ever play a part into that, like with how you test the method?
Insurance?
Yeah, like just due to prices.
Only, and that's
Yeah.
gonna say, basically price. And things like, okay, in our agglutination methods, I have to have a liquid. Liquids don't hold up as long as something dry. So a mono kit EIA will last for a year to 2 years expiration date, whereas a liquid kit is only good 30 to 45 days after I open it, and it's only good for maybe 6 months to a year after manufacture. So all of those things come into it. When you're starting to look at all of the things that come together as far as testing is concerned, that's where it starts to get a little hinky. That's the kind of thing we have to start looking at. What costs more? Okay. If I have a test that I can do on the bench, and I can do the same test on the analyzer, what kind of things am I going to have to compare to decide which way I want to do it? Time. Okay, so if I'm doing time, if it takes a tech and hands-on time, we're not counting that, the tech is going to stand there and watch it for 15 minutes, because I should never see you standing there watching your test cartridge for 15 minutes, okay? So, but let's say that it's 10 minutes of setup time, okay? What does a tech make? Multiply out that, or divide that out, figure out how much salary time I'm paying, and don't forget to include bennies in that. So if they're making $20 an hour and they've got health insurance and they've got all this other, you've got to include all of that cost. So the cost for tech time does not just include your salary. Okay, it includes all the benefits and things that go with that as well. I have to look at how much is that test kit, okay, versus how much is it on the analyzer. A lot of times the things that we're going to put on the analyzer, it isn't worth it to put a test on the analyzer if I'm only going to do 50 of them a year. Because I have to run controls, which means I'm going to have to run 3 controls with it, or 2 controls, or however many. And then that reagent's only going to be good for a certain number of days. So if I don't do, let's say the test pack that goes on the analyzer does 10. Okay, minus 3 for controls means I get 7. And if I only get one every 3 months, that means I'm going to use a whole test pack of 10 every time I get a specimen. Does that make sense? Plus the controls for it. So is that worth it to put that on the analyzer? And that's the kind of decisions, this is playing a huge part in lab testing right now. And you're right, it is driven by insurance, what the insurance will pay for. Our lab made the decision to go to molecular diagnostic testing for strep. I'm not quite sure why. It takes almost an hour to do a strep by PCR. I can do a rapid strep in like 10 minutes. I'm not quite sure why that decision was made. I don't know, maybe it's more sensitive. You know, that's another thing. What's that?
We find that a lot of negative rapids are turning positive. I mean, not like 50%.
Right.
But maybe 10-15% turn positive with molecular.
With the molecular. And that's what I'm guessing. I don't know the numbers on it because I wasn't involved in choosing to do it. But there's so much that goes into all of it, and you do have to keep that in mind. And I will tell you, cost cutting is huge right now, and that includes things like if you're supposed to use 2 drops of a reagent, you better not be using 3. I mean, seriously, there are places that will not fire you, but will discipline you for misuse. You know, you have to be very, very careful. Different things use different pricing. They have different advantages, different disadvantages. So, you know, understanding how all this works and understanding some of this stuff, it kind of helps when you're coming down to making those decisions. And you guys are going to be part of those decisions, especially if any of you decide to go on and get your MLS. And I strongly recommend you do, because I think there's going to be a very large market for bachelor degree techs before 12 along. And I know a lot of, and Jean will talk to you, there's crossover programs that are going to get you there more easily. And I know several of you already have your bachelor's degrees. So it may just be a course or 2 you have to take, or that you just have to work for a year or 2 as a generalist. And most places are going to generalists overall. It just is more economical. Okay, so we got off on a little admin, but that's okay. Agglutination testing. Serology testing is all based, for the most part, on antigen-antibody reactions. And our Cobas 6000, which is our big chemistry analyzer, half of the instrument actually does enzyme immunoassays and agglutination type testing. So even though a lot of this, we're going to talk about how you do it on a card in your hand, there's a lot of instrumentation out there which also does these things. Because for the most part, definitely coag analyzers, and to an extent chemistry analyzers, mostly they're just big pipettes. That's really all they are. They're big pipetting machines. They've got all these lovely little arms, they make all these little, but all there really is just a big pipette. It must be science you're pipetting. Watch any news story. If there's a science news story, what are they doing? You have to figure out why that's science. All right, agglutination. Basically what we're looking for here is an antigen and antibody reaction. Okay? What we do if we are looking, if we are looking for an antibody in your bloodstream, I'm going to coat my carrier particle with the antigen. Okay? Make sense? I'm going to coat my particle with the antigen. What if I were looking for the antigen in your bloodstream? What would I do? Yeah, I'm going to take that FC portion of that antibody and I'm going to stick it in that particle. That's a good question. It can be a red cell. It most commonly these days is a micro latex bead. Okay. It can also be a piece of charcoal, as we will see when we do our PRs. But pretty much it's just any carrier particle. It's just an inert piece of something. A lot of times the older test methodologies would use sensitized red cells. A lot of times for your monocyte or for your monotest they use horse erythrocytes. So we know that my antibody looks like that. Although you guys drew it much more beautifully than I do. We know my antibody looks like this. So how many times can it bind to a carrier molecule? This particular one.
1 to 2.
Okay, I'm sorry. You're right. if I'm putting the antibody on, it's only gonna be one. We're assuming that I've got a carrier particle with antigens. How many antigens can I bind?
2.
2. Okay. So I've got a bunch of these guys, right? And they're kind of floating all over the place. Okay. It's gonna bind my carrier molecule, right? But that one might have to share some, right? There's going to be more than one site on each carrier molecule. So if I've got these, what's it going to make these two do? It's going to pull them close together, isn't it? It's going to create a clump, right? Does that make sense? Because they're being physically pulled into proximity, they're going to form little clumps. So if I'm looking for an antibody, I'm going to be using a carrier with an antigen. If I'm looking for an antigen, I'm going to use a carrier that has an antibody. That holds true across all of the serology testing, okay? See, we hook our little antibodies onto there. And this is not a great representation because each of those looks like it's hooking to one, whereas each of those IgG monomers is actually going to hook to 2 different antigens. Okay? The steps in agglutination, the first is sensitization. The antibodies bind to a single antigenic epitope on the carrier particle. Okay? These reactions here are reversible. So if you're not careful, if you shake it hard enough, you can shake it apart. They'll come loose, okay? The second one, we have a lattice formation. What happens here is this is where we get the cross links. See here we've got this one, this particle is hooked to these 2, this particle is hooked to these 2, this particle is hooked to these 2. So we wind up with this kind of lattice formation, okay? And that particular antibody here, this one, is an IgM molecule. How can I tell? Because there's 5 on there. Okay. IgM is the best agglutinator. It can bind more antigens, but the most common one we use is IgG, and simply because that one's the easiest one to make. Okay. We get the same kind of thing, except we just don't have this joint in the middle here. Okay. You would have single pieces like that. We use saline to it controls the surface charge. We have to make sure that if our particles are sticking together, they're not sticking together because of static electricity. Okay, so we use a saline control to make sure that it isn't due to something outside of what the patient is telling. And again, this is the other way around. We can coat the carrier particle with the antibody, and that's going to hook up to the antigens. And again, here it's hooking to a single, but truthfully, you're going to have one antigen hooked here and one antigen hooked here. Okay. Pardon? Enhancement of the lattice formation. Because we're talking fairly small particles, seriously, static electricity is an issue for us. Okay? Even just a little bit of a charge can either bring the particles together to cause a false positive, or it can push them apart to cause a false negative. Make sense? Okay, just electrostatic charges. So a lot of times what we're going to do is we're going to use something we call LIS, or low ionic strength saline. This is going to get really big for you in blood bank. We use LIS in all of our blood bank testing. When we're doing our antibody screens, we always use some sort of enhancement. You can use a 5 to 30% albumin. Old school, we use much, just because albumin's not as good an enhancement. And it poses viscosity problems and has issues of its own. We use PEG, and I don't remember what PEG stands for. But again, it's just an enhancement solution. And all that's going to do is make these things able to get closer together.
Sorry, you are saying LIS, L-I-S-S, not
LISS,
L-I-S-K?
low ionic strength saline.
Okay.
Yeah. but we tend to refer to it as this. It's easier to say than low ionic strength saline.
The pieces you're adding onto your article, is that what you would put the fluorescent tags on and stuff for the amino acids?
We're not, in this case, antigen antibodies are not, you cannot visually see them hook up, so we have to attach something. In the case of fluorescence, we're hooking it onto something fluorescent. In the case of agglutination, we're hooking it to that particle. So here what we're looking at is we're looking for the particles to clump together.
So you don't need it because they're gonna interact.
I don't understand that question, I'm sorry.
You don't need something to visually see it because.
Right, the particles clumping together is what we're
Yeah,
going to
yeah.
see.
Okay.
Yeah, that's what we're going to see, okay? We can use certain enzymes like trypsin and physin. We can use agitation or centrifugation, okay? Basically what we want to do, if I've got one particle here and one particle here, and my poor little IgG dude here, he can't hook up to both of them because he can't reach. So what my lists and what my albumin and what my enhancement solutions do is they take this guy and push him over so he's closer. So now this guy can go out and go, ha, gotcha. Okay, basically it allows our particles to come close enough together that they can hook up with our antibodies. The other things we can use, the low ionic strength solution will allow that. If we rotate them, okay, then what we're gonna do, we've got our little IgG guy here sitting here, and they're gonna swim past him and he's gonna go here, and it's gonna swim past him and he's gonna grab it here. Okay. Centrifugation, same thing. We're gonna spin it down gently. That's going to bring those particles close enough together that these antibodies can hook things up and make an agglutinin. Yes.
The agitation, you said that could also break it apart, correct?
If you do it too strong, yes. And we'll see that with RPRs for sure. If you really shake them, you can make it go away. And sometimes.
Will they come back, like if you
No.
let them sit? Oh, so once it's broken, it's broken.
Well, it might, but yeah, but you're not gonna sit there and wait for it. You're just gonna call a negative and move on. We do wanna watch what temperature, do you have a class in here at 9? Okay, they told me. Let's just go do lab. Let's just go do lab. We'll go do an agglutination lab. And then you can kind of see